In 2002, the bustling streets of Beijing hid a chilling truth, one that would soon come to light. The city, a symbol of China's rapid modernization and growth, was about to become the backdrop for a crime that would send shockwaves through the nation. Xue Youhua, a man with exceptional intelligence, would orchestrate a crime so methodical, so carefully planned, that it would baffle investigators for months. But it wasn't his brilliance that made this crime so terrifying, it was the cold, calculated nature of the murder that followed. Xue Youhua was a man who blended into society effortlessly. To his colleagues, he was just another face in the crowd, a quiet, diligent worker who went about his business with no suspicion attached. His demeanor was calm, and his actions measured, making him seem harmless, even likable. But behind this facade was a mind capable of unimaginable acts. Xue's true nature remained hidden from those around him. What could drive someone like him, seemingly so normal, to commit murder? What lies beneath the surface of this quiet man? For months, Xue studied his victim, his colleague, someone he had worked alongside for years. The two shared a professional relationship that appeared to be built on mutual respect. But Xue's mind was calculating, and his resentment festered quietly, unnoticed by anyone. It wasn't a sudden act of rage. No, Xue's plans were methodical and deliberate. He observed his victims' every move, studied their habits, and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. Xue had been planning this moment for months. He studied his victims' schedule, noting the times they were most vulnerable. Every detail had been calculated. Xue knew when his victim would be alone, where they would be, and exactly when to act. It was not a random act of violence, it was a perfect execution of a plan months in the making. Xue was not driven by passion or anger, he was driven by control, by the need to prove that his intellect could accomplish the unthinkable. When the time finally came, Xue took action with chilling efficiency. There was no hesitation, no moment of panic. Everything had been meticulously arranged. He disabled security cameras, removed any potential evidence, and waited for his victim to step into the trap. What was about to happen was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. Xue had planned this moment down to the last detail, and now it was time to execute his cold-blooded plan. The murder itself was swift and calculated. There were no outbursts, no signs of struggle. Xue had anticipated every move, and the victim never had a chance. The crime was clean, methodical, and precise. Afterward, Xue did not panic. He cleaned the scene, removing all traces of his presence, erasing every piece of evidence. It was as if the murder had never happened except for the lifeless body left behind in an office that had once been full of life. But despite Xue's careful planning, despite his belief that his intellect would shield him, the truth has a way of emerging. The police began their investigation, and though the crime seemed perfect, there were cracks in Xue's story. It wasn't the crime itself that gave him away, it was his overconfidence. His meticulous plan had one fatal flaw: Xue never accounted for the relentless pursuit of justice. Xue's intelligence, his cold, calculating nature, ultimately led to his capture. His ability to plan was unmatched, but in the end, it was his arrogance, his belief that he could outsmart the law that became his downfall. The police, relentless in their pursuit, found the cracks in his story, and slowly, the perfect crime unraveled. Xue Youhua's victim was not a stranger. He was a colleague, someone Xue had worked with for years. On the surface, their relationship appeared professional and even cordial. They shared office space, collaborated on projects, and had lunch together on occasion. To everyone around them, Xue and his victim were nothing more than two colleagues working toward the same goal. But Xue was different. While the victim saw a colleague, Xue saw someone who was a means to an end. A piece in a larger, coldly calculated plan. To most, this seemed like a typical office environment. But for Xue, it was a battleground, a place where he could slowly assess his victim, learning their habits, their weaknesses. His victim had no idea that the very person sitting across from him, sharing these moments, was silently watching and calculating. Xue took note of everything: the victim's daily routine, the times they were alone, and the small details that would later become essential to his plan. Xue wasn't driven by jealousy or hatred, but by something far colder: an intellectual challenge, a need to prove that his mind could outwit not only the system but his colleagues as well. Xue didn't rush his plan. Patience was key. He waited for the perfect moment, the moment when the victim would be most vulnerable. Every move was calculated. Every conversation, every interaction between them was a piece in the larger puzzle. Xue wasn't only gathering information, he was testing his victim's trust, assessing the best way to manipulate him without raising suspicion. It was a game of strategy, and Xue was the master of it. As days turned into weeks, Xue continued to observe, learn, and refine his plan. He had all the time in the world, and he was in no rush. It wasn't until later that Xue realized the power of the mask he wore. By being so calm, so ordinary, no one ever suspected him. In fact, his colleagues praised him for his work ethic, for his quiet dedication. But Xue knew that these outward appearances were simply a façade, a means to an end. Beneath the surface, the wheels of his plan were turning meticulously, quietly, relentlessly. What made Xue Youhua's approach so terrifying wasn't just his patience, it was his understanding of human nature. He knew how to manipulate, how to exploit his victim's trust without ever revealing his true intentions. Xue had no need for violence, no need for confrontation. He simply waited for the moment when his victim would become vulnerable, when he would make the first move. And once he did, there would be no turning back. To Xue, this wasn't just about removing an obstacle. It was a calculated move in a much larger game. Each decision, each step in his plan, was part of a carefully crafted narrative, one where he controlled the entire outcome. The victim, unaware of Xue's growing resentment, remained vulnerable and trapped in the spider's web without ever realizing it. And as Xue's plan began to take shape, the inevitability of what would come next grew clearer with every passing day. Xue Youhua's victim had no idea that the man he sat next to every day, the colleague he trusted, had already decided his fate. The crime was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. But what drove Xue to make that fateful decision? Was it resentment, an intellectual challenge, or something deeper? And more importantly, would anyone ever uncover the chilling truth of what lay beneath the surface? As we delve deeper into Xue's world, the question remains: how far will someone go when their mind becomes their most dangerous weapon? Stay with us as we continue to unravel the chilling mystery of Xue Youhua's cold calculation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the next part of this chilling story. The day had come. The pieces of Xue Youhua's intricate plan were finally falling into place, each one clicking into place like gears in a perfectly crafted machine. Xue had calculated every detail, from the moment his victim would be alone, to the precise moment when he would make his move. What seemed like an ordinary day in the office was, in fact, the culmination of months of meticulous planning. Xue had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm under pressure, but even now, as he prepared to execute the crime, he showed no sign of fear. For him, this was not just about eliminating a colleague, it was about proving something far greater. Xue's mind was a machine, calculating and precise. He didn't rely on the chaos of emotions or the heat of the moment. He took a different approach. The key to his plan was timing. He knew that his victim would be alone on a specific day, at a specific time exactly when Xue had planned. There would be no distractions, no interruptions. The execution would be seamless, almost invisible. But why did he choose this path? What was it about his victim that made Xue take this extraordinary step, one that would change both their lives forever? Xue's plan involved precision, but also secrecy. He knew he had to cover his tracks perfectly, ensuring there would be no evidence left behind. He disabled the security cameras, making sure no one would witness what was about to occur. His victim would never see him coming. To Xue, this was not just about murder, it was about proving his superiority, proving that his intellect could outwit everyone, even the authorities. But in his obsession with perfection, Xue had overlooked something crucial: his belief in his invulnerability. As the day of the crime approached, Xue's demeanor remained unchanged. To those around him, he was still the calm, collected professional. He continued his work, attended meetings, and interacted with his colleagues as if nothing was amiss. It was this ability to blend into the background, to maintain the mask of normalcy, that made him so dangerous. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a man who could hide his true intentions behind a facade of everyday life. How many others like Xue are out there, walking among us, hiding in plain sight? The final pieces of his plan falling into place, Xue waited for the moment when everything would align. He knew that once he made his move, there would be no turning back. The consequences would be irreversible, but to him, that was the point. This wasn't just about eliminating his victim, it was about showing the world that he could outsmart them all. But as he prepared for the execution of his plan, Xue began to question himself. Was it arrogance that drove him, or something darker? And in the end, would his intellect truly protect him from the law? Every detail in place, Xue was ready to execute his plan. But the question remains, was he truly in control, or was he simply playing a game with the law that would ultimately destroy him? What drives a person to commit such an act of cold, calculated violence? Stay with us as we continue to unravel the chilling story of Xue Youhua. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next part of this disturbing true crime story. The day had come. The pieces of Xue Youhua's intricate plan were finally falling into place, each one clicking into place like gears in a perfectly crafted machine. Xue had calculated every detail, from the moment his victim would be alone, to the precise moment when he would make his move. What seemed like an ordinary day in the office was, in fact, the culmination of months of meticulous planning. Xue had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm under pressure, but even now, as he prepared to execute the crime, he showed no sign of fear. For him, this was not just about eliminating a colleague, it was about proving something far greater. Xue's victim, unaware of the impending danger, gathered his belongings, preparing to leave. The evening had unfolded like any other. The air in the office seemed thick with the tension Xue had carefully crafted. It was the kind of quiet, routine moment that most people wouldn't think twice about. But for Xue, this was the point of no return. He had orchestrated every element of this scene, knowing that once it unfolded, there would be no coming back from it. As his victim turned to walk toward the exit, Xue made his move. In that moment, everything changed. Xue didn't hesitate. He didn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He had already planned for every possibility, every outcome. With precise movements, he approached the victim, his footsteps silent, as though the very air around him held its breath. The victim had no idea what was coming, not a single clue that he was walking into a trap designed with such meticulous detail that even the police would struggle to unravel it. The strike was swift, so quick that the victim barely had time to react. There was no struggle, no desperate attempt to defend himself. In a single motion, Xue silenced his victim, neutralizing him with chilling efficiency. It wasn't just the murder that made this moment so terrifying, it was the cold, calm way in which Xue carried it out. There was no chaos, no rush. Xue had executed the crime with the precision of a surgeon, and when it was over, he stepped back, allowing the stillness of the moment to wash over him. Xue's plan had gone perfectly, almost too perfectly. He cleaned up the scene, wiping away any evidence, ensuring that no trace of his involvement would ever be found. The room was immaculate, as if nothing had ever happened. But as the silence settled over the office, something unexpected happened. Xue's mind, so focused on the success of his plan, began to question something deeper. Did he truly control the situation, or had something more sinister been set into motion? As Xue finished the final touches of his cleanup, he paused for a moment. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Could he truly get away with this? Was his intellect enough to shield him from the consequences of his actions? He had spent so much time perfecting the crime that the aftermath felt almost like an afterthought. But now, in the stillness, as he looked at his victim's lifeless body, the weight of what he had done began to sink in. For the first time, Xue felt the true cost of his brilliant plan. Xue Youhua had committed the perfect crime, or so he thought. His intellect had led him to believe that he was invincible, that his meticulous planning would shield him from any consequences. But as the night wore on, Xue couldn't escape the feeling that something had gone wrong. The perfect crime, he realized, wasn't perfect after all. And the consequences of his actions were about to catch up with him in ways he could never have anticipated. Xue Youhua's crime was a masterpiece of planning, a chilling example of the dangers that lie within the most calculated minds. But even the most brilliant plans can be undone. As Xue prepares to face the consequences of his actions, we're left wondering, how often does the perfect crime remain perfect? Stay tuned for the next chapter in this unfolding mystery. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Xue Youhua had believed he was untouchable, that his brilliant mind had crafted a flawless crime, impervious to detection. But in the days that followed, something unexpected began to happen. The world he had meticulously built around his crime began to crack, piece by piece. Despite his careful planning, Xue couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. The police, though initially baffled, were starting to look at the smallest details, asking the questions Xue had hoped would remain unasked. For a mind like Xue's, it was a terrifying thought, that the very perfection he prided himself on could be his undoing. As the investigation into the crime deepened, the police started uncovering small, seemingly insignificant details. A minor discrepancy here, a strange occurrence there. And suddenly, a pattern began to form. What Xue had overlooked in his arrogance, what he had dismissed as trivial, was beginning to speak for itself. The perfect crime, it seemed, wasn't perfect after all. The more the police dug, the more they uncovered, and Xue's confidence began to falter. His mind, once so sharp and calculated, began to race with the possibility that his perfect plan was slipping away. The first real crack in Xue's perfect plan came when a seemingly minor witness, a colleague who had left work early that evening, reported seeing something unusual. A fleeting glimpse of someone in the building after hours. The police were not yet sure if this would lead anywhere, but Xue, in his overconfidence, believed it was insignificant. However, this small, overlooked detail would begin to unravel the thread that Xue had carefully woven. As the investigation progressed, Xue's mind, usually so composed, became filled with doubt. Was his plan truly foolproof? Or had he made a mistake? Xue had underestimated the power of the human mind, how even the smallest details could trigger a cascade of events that could shatter even the most carefully crafted facade. The more the investigation progressed, the more Xue realized he had made a crucial misstep. In his desire for perfection, he had failed to account for the possibility that someone might notice the inconsistencies, the small cracks in his plan. It was then that Xue understood the true meaning of his own vulnerability. No matter how brilliant a mind might be, it is always subject to the flaws of human nature. The police had finally begun to connect the dots. What seemed like small, insignificant details, Xue's odd behavior around the time of the murder, the colleague's strange observation, and the minor inconsistency in his alibi, began to come together, revealing a disturbing truth. Xue Youhua was no longer just a professional, calm colleague. He had become the prime suspect in his own perfect crime. As the investigation closed in on him, Xue's once unshakable confidence was replaced by fear. And fear, as he now realized, was something he could not control. Xue had become his own worst enemy. The very intelligence that had helped him execute the crime so perfectly was now working against him. His mind, once a razor-sharp tool for planning, now erased with doubts, uncertainties, and a growing sense of inevitability. The police were getting closer, and Xue knew it was only a matter of time before they found the final piece of the puzzle. As he sat in his apartment, alone with his thoughts, he began to wonder if he had truly been the mastermind of this crime, or if he had simply played a dangerous game with fate that was destined to end in ruin. As Xue's world begins to crumble around him, we're left with a haunting question: how far can a brilliant mind go before its own perfection becomes its downfall? Stay with us as we continue to unravel the chilling story of Xue Youhua's journey from brilliance to destruction. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow the rest of this unfolding mystery. Xue Youhua had always believed in the invincibility of his mind, in the superiority of his intellect over others. His ability to outsmart every system, every person, had been the core of his confidence. But now, as the investigation tightened its grip on him, that same mind, once so sharp and unyielding, began to turn on itself. The very precision with which he had crafted his perfect crime was now being questioned, dissected piece by piece. He began to wonder, was he truly in control, or had he merely been the pawn in a game played by forces greater than himself? Despite his brilliance, Xue was not immune to the crushing pressure of reality. As the police closed in on him, his mind, once his greatest asset, now seemed like a double-edged sword. The very patterns he had created, the logical steps that had been his strength, now felt like traps, tightening around him with every passing hour. Every decision he made, every action he took, seemed to echo with the possibility of his downfall. The mind that had outsmarted so many was now being consumed by doubt. And in that doubt, Xue found fear, a fear he had never known before. Xue's superiority complex had always been his armor, but now, it had become his greatest weakness. The belief that his intellect made him infallible had blinded him to the one thing he could not control, the unpredictability of human nature. He had crafted the perfect plan, or so he thought, but what he failed to account for was his own vulnerability, the fear that now clawed at his mind. In this quiet room, surrounded by his own thoughts, Xue had become a prisoner of his own brilliance. Xue began to question everything. The cool, calculated steps that had once brought him comfort now seemed like a path leading to inevitable destruction. Could a mind so superior to others truly be outsmarted? Was he merely a puppet, dancing to a tune he couldn't hear? And the hardest question of all, did his intellect, which he held in such high regard, now betray him? For the first time in his life, Xue found himself grappling with something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The thought that had always been far from Xue's mind, failure, now began to take root in his psyche. His perfect crime, once a symbol of his intellectual prowess, now seemed like a looming failure, threatening to unravel everything he had worked so hard to construct. Xue had always prided himself on his ability to see the world as a series of logical steps. But now, the very logic he had trusted was betraying him, revealing the fragility of his carefully curated world. Was it possible that even someone as brilliant as Xue could fail? With the police investigation closing in on him, Xue began to lose his once steady grip on reality. His thoughts, once clear and methodical, were now clouded with doubt. Every time he looked into the mirror, he saw not the brilliant mastermind he once was, but a man trapped by his own genius. Xue's mind, which had once been a fortress, had become a battlefield, filled with questions that he could no longer answer. The fear of being caught, of being exposed for the crime he had thought was flawless, was beginning to consume him from the inside. As the walls closed in around him, Xue realized something that shook him to his core. He was not the mastermind of this crime, he had been a victim of it. His brilliance had led him down a path of his own making, but now it was the same intellect that had once served him so well that was unraveling everything he had carefully planned. The moment of perfection, he had realized, had always been an illusion. And in that illusion, he had built his own destruction. Xue's descent into madness has just begun. The mind that once saw itself as above all others now faces the consequences of its own genius. Will he be able to outsmart the very system he once believed he could control, or will his brilliant mind betray him? Stay tuned to discover how the perfect plan unravels in the face of human imperfection. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more of this chilling true crime story. Xue Youhua's once unshakable confidence was now a distant memory. What had started as a perfect plan, a flawless execution, had evolved into a nightmare, one that he could no longer control. The walls had closed in, and there was no escape. The more he tried to outthink the investigation, the more the cracks in his facade grew wider. The police were closing in, inching closer to uncovering the truth. And yet, in the back of his mind, Xue still clung to the belief that he was above it all, that somehow, his intellect would save him from the inevitable. Xue had always been in control of his thoughts, his actions, and, most importantly, his environment. But now, in this moment of truth, his control was slipping. The carefully constructed world he had built for himself was collapsing, and with it, the illusion of his superiority. The police, relentless and methodical, had followed every lead, uncovered every mistake, and were now on the verge of bringing Xue to justice. For the first time, Xue had no answers. and for the first time, his brilliant mind was clouded with uncertainty. Xue's internal struggle intensified. His pride had once been his armor, but now it was his prison. He couldn't bear the thought of being exposed for what he truly was, a mere mortal, subject to the same laws of justice that govern everyone else. The very intellect he had used to craft his perfect crime had now become his undoing. In his attempt to outsmart everyone, Xue had failed to realize that no matter how brilliant the mind, it is always at the mercy of the truth. The investigators were closing in, piecing together every detail that Xue had overlooked. The small inconsistencies in his story, the witness statements, the misplaced evidence, all of it was coming together. Xue had always been the one in control, but now he was a man running out of time. The truth, once elusive, was now unavoidable. And as Xue sat in his apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his perfect crime, the consequences of his actions began to feel real. It was no longer a question of if he would be caught, but when. As the police gathered their final pieces of evidence, Xue had no choice but to face the inevitable. He had once believed that his intelligence would protect him, that his mind would outwit the law. But now, as the evidence piled up, Xue's intellect seemed like a cruel joke. He had built a perfect crime, only to watch it crumble under the weight of its own complexity. The police were ready to move in, and Xue was left with nothing but the knowledge that his genius had led him to this very moment of reckoning. Xue Youhua had once been the master of control, the puppet master pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But now, as the police closed in, he realized that he had always been the puppet, manipulated by his own arrogance and pride. The laws of justice, once something he believed he could outsmart, were now closing in on him. The final question remained: would he be able to accept the consequences of his actions, or would his intellect drive him to even greater lengths to avoid the inevitable? As Xue's fate draws near, we're left wondering how a man so brilliant could fall so far. The story of Xue Youhua's perfect crime has come to its tragic end, but the question remains: can brilliance and pride ever coexist without leading to destruction? Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the chilling conclusion of Xue's story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime mysteries.